We have to scroll down on there. Shall I answer that? I can answer that. Okay, so welcome everyone. It's good to see you. I'm Dr. Jacob Wilson. This is Ryan Lowry, the world's next greatest scientist. He's cranking out research like crazy. He has like 70-something publications already and is spoken nationally. A lot of his research has been on like blood flow restriction training, optimizing breakfast. So he's going to be here helping us out and moderating this session. You're actually right now in one of our labs, which is our psychomotor lab, and that's that device that you see behind us. It's called the Dynavision. And basically what we do is that device allows us to test focus and stuff like reaction time. So we'll test things like pre-workout formulations and individuals will be able to focus and concentrate. So, okay. So basically what we're going to do is go ahead and just take these questions on. And one of the first questions comes from Ryan Weaver. And he goes, hey, you know, I've read about research on protein synthesis. Tell me what your take is. Essentially, he says, I suggest that, or research suggests that one consume 4 to 6 larger protein doses per day instead of 6 to 8 meals, and wait 4 to 5 hours between meals rather than 2 to 3 hours. So, so again, the question basically is saying that you should eat less frequently instead of more frequently based on research. So this is really interesting. So what I'll tell you what this is, the research you're talking about is extremely, extremely complex. And it's based on a concept known as refractoriness. And essentially what happened is that in the past, what we know is that after you eat a meal, about 3 hours after you eat a meal, protein synthesis stops. Okay, think about protein synthesis as like building muscle. So, you know, if protein synthesis is like building muscle, and so after 3 hours that stops. Now, but here's the real tricky part about that. You know that the branched chain amino acids, particularly like leucine, actually triggers protein synthesis itself. The crazy thing is at 3 hours, leucine's still elevated, okay? But you stop building muscle. You're stopping protein synthesis. So the old theory was that your muscle got smart, and essentially if you maintain protein levels all the time, that your muscle got smart, and so you don't grow, continue to grow out of control, it stops protein synthesis. So this theory that the researchers discussing is basically saying that you need to let the system reset every 4 to 5 hours, so that way you can reinstitute protein synthesis again. Okay, now the issue is this. While it was an interesting theory, the theory's been shown to be wrong. And that was, it was shown wrong by my brother, Dr. Gabriel Wilson. And he actually did research at University of Illinois for his doctorate. And what Dr. Gabe Wilson found was that what's going on is that 3 hours after a meal, you run out of energy. It's not that you can't respond to protein anymore. It's that you've run out of energy, so you need to give an energy source. So, for example, between meals, so after a meal, like two hours after a meal, you could have a snack. You could have like a granola bar, or if you're ketogenic, you could have fats or something like that. You know, or what do you recommend between meals?
Or something like branched chain amino acids. Any of your branched chain amino acid supplements between your meals would be perfect.
Yeah. So actually, that was interesting. Gabriel found that if you go meal, and then 2 hours after the meal have branched chain amino acids, and then meal like 2 hours later, you basically intersperse. So I would agree with the point that you could have less total meals, like 4 to 5, but in between meals, a branched chain amino acid supplement will actually keep you quite anabolic. So that's my response, and that's based on the most current research.
That's good. All right, we got another question here from Ryan. How hard can I push myself without overtraining? 2 days with weights, ideal splits when training every day?
Okay, so this is a real difficult question, like how hard can I push myself without overtraining? First off, let me say this. I don't think most people ever overtrain. It's the most extreme people that overtrain. It's more like military models where you're doing like sustained military operations, but it's very difficult to get someone to overtrain. Overtraining means it takes you months to recover. Okay? Now, most people overreach, what basically means that you essentially can recover within 1 to 2 weeks. Okay? So probably the question is like, how hard should I train without overreaching? And the thing is, what we found in our lab, in fact, we just had an article come out on Bodybuilding.com on this topic, was that when you train, you should always set up your training programs. You should pre-program them, okay? So essentially, you don't want to just go in the weight room and go, I'm going to destroy myself. You want to plan in the weight room certain workouts where you have, for example, say you're training a body part 2 to 3 times a week. And I would recommend, if you're trying to make a body part grow, to train it at least 3 times a week, if not more. And essentially what happens is that when you do that, you can't train it the same way every time. You can't do 40 sets every time you go into the gym. Because one, it's the same stimulus. You're not changing it up. And then two, the other issue becomes that you don't have enough variation. So what you want to do is, the first way to prevent yourself from overreaching is that you need to vary your workout. So you need to have like a very hardcore day, like a day where you just tear it up, okay? You know, you're doing giant sets, supersets. You know, you're following some of our good friend Lawrence Ballinger's techniques, like cannonballs. And you're just, which I would check out on Bodybuilding.com, by the way. Mm-hmm. But you're just destroying yourself, essentially. And then you have one day that's a moderate day, where it's like meat and potatoes, you're just getting the basics in, and then a light day. Now, how you know that you're overreaching or not is something we've tested in our lab, and it's called auto-regulatory training. Auto-regulatory training. And that means that I know I have to get these 3 workouts in a week, but I do them based on how I'm feeling. So if I come in on Wednesday and I feel horrible, that day I do my light day. On the other hand, if I came in on Wednesday and I felt like I could run through a wall, that's when I do my hardcore day. So basically, that's called flexible periodization or auto-regulatory training. And essentially, you literally will see at minimum double the gains. Even if you did all 3 workouts the same, it's not smart. It's not ideal to come in the gym. If you have the scale we use is scale 0 to 10. It's called perceived recovery. And if you are a 5 and you're going to do your most hardcore workout, you will actually overreach and you won't make any gains. So ideally, you're keeping yourself in a threshold where you don't fall below 7. If you do fall below 7, make sure you do your light workout. If every single day during that week you're falling below a 7, that means you're likely overreach and that you need to taper. And basically, to taper, you need to lower your training volume by about anywhere from 50 to 80% for about 1 to 2 weeks.
Yeah, really good, really good. It's important to remember when you're trying to make gains, when you're trying to adapt, recovery is just as important. Things like sleep become really important. Keeping psychological stress, social stress, keeping all of that down is going to be really important when you're trying to make adaptations.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Let's see what we got. Luis has a great question. Creatine, if taking, when is best to stop taking it for week 12 pictures? So what about creatine supplementation?
When is best to stop taking it? I don't know that answer. You see, like a reason to really stop taking creatine. I mean,
just back off, I would say.
Yeah.
Maybe back down to like 2 to 5 grams. I don't think you'll have any issues for your week 12 picture.
Yeah, if you're back, basically, like, obviously stop bloating it, but if so you don't have any bloating or anything or any gastric distress. If you're taking too much, it could cause that. But and the only reason I say that is, like, if you're loading it again and you don't drink enough water, then you could cause gastric distress, just like anything. But if you're taking it properly, you're not going to see that. If you take 2 to 3 grams, it's just going to go into muscle and it's going to draw water into the cell. And give you a better pump. So it's not. I don't see it having negative effects on pictures.
Yeah. Good. Great question here from Andrew. I saw you and Ben Pekulski talking about bands and chains to train. Why is this better than normal weights? And if so, how do I use it?
Okay, that's a good question. So, all right. So, if you look at Ben, Ben's a really good friend of ours. In fact, he's coming in the lab now, prepping for the Arnold, and I think you'll see like a whole new package with Ben going on stage this year. Looking really, really shredded already. But basically, you want to think of it like this. When you're doing a bench press, for example, so I'm doing a bench press, you want to think of a concept known as a strength curve, okay? So basically, what is the hardest part of the bench? Well, on the bottom, the first half of the lift, essentially, is when I'm at my, have the lowest mechanical advantage. So essentially, when I'm coming up here, what ends up happening is that once I've overcome that sticking point where I have the lowest mechanical advantage, the rest is just riding momentum. So if you put like EMG on the muscles, we basically found that what ends up happening is that your muscle activation goes down the second half of the lift. And the reason why is because you have the greatest mechanical advantage. Think about it for a second. You could load up so much more weight on the bar from here to here. It's the same thing on a squat. Every time I go to the gym, not every time, but most of the times you see a guy load the weight up on the bar. You know, they got like 4 plates on the bar, 5 plates on the bar. You know, guys stop and look, whoa, and almost every time, what do? They squat like 1/4 of the way down, and then they come up, right? These like kind of quarter squats. And the problem with that is because you have the most force at near full extension. So that's key, because where are you making gains? Where is the window of adaptation? It's where it's more difficult. And that's on the bottom in the first half of the range of motion. So what do bands do? Essentially, bands, you know, at the bottom of the lift, the band is unloaded. It doesn't have a lot of tension. But just like a rubber band, when you pull the band up and up and up, tension's placed on the band. So it, what we call, accommodates your strength curve. And what that means is that if I'm benching and I'm here, when the band's unloaded is when I'm weakest. But as you come all the way up and I'm strongest, the band has more tension. So now I increase my window of adaptation. And essentially, we did a study that we published in Journal of Strength Conditioning Research. Ryan and I and Jordan Joy, we published a study, and we found that basically NCAA athletes gained more lean mass using bands than not using bands. And besides bands, what else do you use?
They're cool. Bands, chains are another technique where you can use that are unloaded at the bottom and then more tension as you get to the top. Both of those are really good to try and incorporate.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. All right. McKay, I think, has a great question. After bulking, how much would you suggest a cut?
After bulking, how much would you suggest a cut? That's, well,
it's going to depend. I think a lot of it's going to depend how you bulk. We've done a lot of research in our lab on bulking and how you should properly bulk. And one of our guys, Sean McCleary, has a study that's coming out in JISSN very soon. And basically what we did was we had guys that bulked really high calorie, right? They went like people typically would, a ton of weight gainers. And then we had guys that just moderately bulked with a little weight gain supplement. Basically what we found is those who did the little weight gain supplement, not the extreme bulk, actually gained muscle and lost fat. Meanwhile, those who went extreme primarily just gained fat. So if you're gonna bulk, we suggest a moderate calorie overfeed. In which case you can still make gains, and you really won't have any negative effects on body composition.
Exactly. So I think that's kind of the key. Like Ryan points out, is that how much you have to cut is going to depend on how hardcore, how extreme your bulk is. It's like Ryan pointed out, when we had people, when we did the lighter calorie, which means you're raising your calories maybe like 500 to 800 extra, essentially what we found is that they didn't gain any fat. In fact, they lost a little bit of fat. So now, and again, if you're more like, if you're very endomorphic, then or tend to be more insulin resistant, then you're going to need to be more careful on how you bulk and maybe even go more conservative. But if you're conservative, you may not have to cut that much at all. And then when you diet, it's going to depend on what your starting body fat percentage really is. And so if it's starting off lower, well, then you can be very conservative.
Mm-hmm. One thing too to keep in mind is there's some really cool research out of Dr. Joey Antonio's lab, where basically they overfed on protein. So that's something that people don't typically do, but they had people consuming like 4.4 grams per kilo of protein, and they overfed and they didn't see any increases in fat mass. So depending upon which macronutrient you're really increasing is going to have an impact on body composition.
Yeah, exactly right. So, you know, it's very hard to gain fat on protein, that's for sure.
It is. It definitely is. Here we go. Great question here. What's up, Doc? I'm thinking about starting a ketogenic diet, but my doctor says my cholesterol is going to skyrocket. Should I stay clear of this?
Well, you know, Ryan's been doing a lot of research on ketogenic dieting. I have my thoughts. Right, Brian, what do you think? Is this cholesterol going to go up?
So, you know, you go to your doctor, and a lot of times, first off, they hear the word ketogenic, and a lot of them freak out, first off, because they assume ketogenic and ketoacidosis are the same thing, when in actuality, they're two polar opposites. To put things in perspective, ketogenic is like 1.5 to maybe 5 millimolar of blood ketones, while ketoacidosis is what we typically see in like type 2 diabetics. And it's hard for a doctor to really distinguish those two. But as far as blood lipid profiles and cholesterol are concerned, really what we're seeing with a lot of our research, a lot of research from Dr. Jeff Volek, is really that your cholesterol profile seems to actually improve. And even though you're eating a lot of fat, what's actually happening is your HDL, which is your good cholesterol, is going up, and you're really improving your overall cholesterol, your profile. And we actually see triglycerides go down. So overall, we're seeing actually increases in health parameters.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing too. I think one of the things to explain to you guys is that insulin is actually what increases the enzyme, which actually increases the synthesis or the building of cholesterol. So essentially, if insulin's very low, then what you're going to end up doing is you'll end up lowering your cholesterol. And like Rye says, you're going to increase good cholesterol. Now, the one lipid that does go up is testosterone. So we actually did a study that we did last semester, or in the spring semester, and basically guys lost fat ketogenic dieting, but they gained like 100 points on their testosterone levels because testosterone's a lipid. So you're providing more lipid, and actually testosterone goes up. So this is pretty interesting stuff. And actually, we have some new data where, like, when you're ketogenic dieting and you lose a lot of fat, your testosterone doesn't plummet like you normally would when you diet hard, when it goes to the floor and you feel horrible. So yeah, great question, but no, you're not going to hurt your cholesterol levels.
No worries. All right, next question's here from Hannah. Can I drink aminos during the day even when no workout is intended, or is it best to only drink during workouts?
Hey, Hannah, that's a really good question. What I'll say is it kind of goes back to the initial question that we talked about, Hannah. So basically, think about it like this. When you eat a meal, that meal has amino acids in it. It should, anyway. You know, you should have at least like 20 to 40 grams of protein in that meal, depending on the quality of the protein. And those amino acids are actually going to last quite a long time. But even on non-workout days, remember, you're adapting outside of the weight room. So the weight room provides a stimulus for you to make adaptations in your muscle and things like that. However, you're adapting on the off days, you know, or in between workouts. So supplementation and stuff like amino acid supplementation is just as important, if not more important, on the off days than during the day. So everything to realize this, that oftentimes, like, we know that the 3 branched chain amino acids, again, I talked about this before, but leucine, isoleucine, and valine, about 3 grams of leucine, can trigger as much protein synthesis or muscle repair as like an entire 20 to 30 grams of protein. On your off days, your calories could be slightly lower because you don't need as much fuel for your workouts. And so One way to get the same protein synthesis is to actually up the branched chain amino acid supplementation on your off days, so you keep the anabolism high, but your calories aren't as high. So that means we're making ourselves more calorie efficient and getting more growth per calorie. So I would say, yeah, definitely. As far as drinking it during your workout, I think depends on the length of your workout. I would say pre-workout's fine. Have your BCAAs stacked with your favorite pre-workout. If your favorite pre-workout has the BCAAs in it, go ahead and down that, and that's going to last throughout your workout. A typical 60 to 90-minute workout, and you should be just fine.
Great. All right, we got one here from Julie. How rapidly should I lose weight?
Oh, how rapidly should you lose weight? Okay. Julie, it's a really good question. So basically, that depends on your starting body fat percentage, essentially, right? So there's research by a scientist named Forbes, and Forbes spent a lot of his research looking at this. The one thing that I want to point out to you guys is this, that fat, like when you use body fat, seems to have sort of a protective effect oftentimes against muscle loss. So for example, if you had someone who started off at like 30% body fat, all right, if someone's 30% body fat, and you compare that person to someone who's 10% body fat, and they both were to lose 2 pounds in a loss. The person who was 30% body fat, almost 100% of that would be fat. Okay? But the person who's 10% who lost 2 pounds, they would be in danger of losing muscle. It seems that your body, the leaner you are, preferentially starts to use muscle. And that the more drastic the body fat, or the more drastic the weight loss, the more in danger you become of losing lean mass. In fact, so if you go to my Muscle Prof column on Bodybuilding.com, I have an article talking about how rapidly should you lose fat, and this is what we talk about. So what we basically suggest is that at the beginning of your cut, if you have more body fat, say you're like, above 15%, or if you're female, like above 20%, you can start off losing like 1 to 2 pounds a week and probably be fine, not worry about losing muscle. When you get down to where you're really lean, for you, you need to be more conservative, because you are in danger at that point of losing muscle mass. So again, basically, if you have a lot more body fat to start, you can be a little bit more aggressive, possibly. But as you get closer, you're going to need to be more conservative, because you will lose muscle, and you need to pay attention at that time point to all the anti-catabolic stuff that you need to pay attention to.
Exactly, and I think this 12-week transformation is perfect. I mean, it's a long time for you to realize, hey, I have time to accomplish my goals. Some people, unfortunately, try and do what's called crash dieting, right? They try and crash diet for 4 weeks. They have something to peak for, maybe a wedding or pictures, and they diet down real hard. Well, it's very similar to like a bodybuilder prepping for a show. They're cutting really fast before the end of their show, and there's actually some research out of Chris Foss' lab where they've done some stuff where they've tracked someone dieting down, prepping for like a situation like that, where they've lost an extreme amount of weight, and it actually takes several months after that for their metabolism to recover. Their metabolism, their hormones, things like that take a long time to recover if you're dieting down fast. So that's something like this, you want to take a slower approach. Again, if you're heavier or you have a lot more to lose, then you can be a little bit more aggressive than someone who's lean. But again, just plan it out and make sure you're not really trying to crash diet.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The bottom line is you're likely going to be able to lose more fat when you have more body fat without being as drastic. So you don't want to start off using all your tools at once.
Exactly. All right, let's see, what else do we have here? We have a great question here from Chase. How much protein should I have at each meal?
Oh, okay, that's a good question, Chase. Okay, again, it really depends on the quality of the protein source, but what I would say is that your highest quality protein is always going to come from things that are like animal-based. So that's going to be, for example, obviously any meats. your like eggs, whey protein. And typically in that order is going to be the quality as far as the leucine content. So you need about 2 to 3 grams of leucine to maximize protein synthesis. So if you're a guy, around my size, maybe like 80 pounds to 200 pounds, you're probably going to need 20 to 30 grams of high quality protein to maximize protein synthesis, right? If you're a really big guy, you're above 220, then that's a whole nother topic. Really, you're probably going to go 30 to 40 grams. Okay, so that's key. So basically, again, like you're around 180, 200 pounds or below that, probably 20 to 30 grams of high quality protein. If you're starting to get 220 above, you're probably going to need anywhere from 30 to 40 grams of protein to maximize the response. Oftentimes, people will say, well, if I have more than that, will I just stop absorbing it? Or my body not be able to use it? The answer is no. You're going to be able to use all the protein you consume. The question is that protein synthesis will peak essentially at that mark. It is also possible that if you're very hungry and you have more than 20, 30 grams, it might make you fuller, which could be good when you're dieting. There's other benefits to protein. I'm not going to say I have 100 grams, but if you go 10 grams over what I just recommended and it makes you fuller and it makes you able to adhere to your diet better, also based on what Ryan said earlier with Joey Antonio's work, it's very hard to gain fat on protein. So think about that as a tool that you can sort of incorporate into your regimen.
Great. Let's see. We got some here from Bella. When we are dieting to lean out / build muscle, what is the best way to incorporate those foods that are not health improving, such as cheat meals or cheap foods into a diet that keeps us sane but does not stall or halt our progress?
That's a really good. What do you think?
That's a really good question. I'm going to answer this in 2 ways. The first, I'll say, if you are going for something like a cheat food or a cheat meal, there's some data that shows that like eating before you train, eating like something like that before you train. So say it's like, I would save it for like my leg hypertrophy day. You say you're doing like German volume on legs, you're really getting after it on squats. Well, on that day, I'd incorporate maybe a cheat meal. Maybe I'm training at noon, and maybe I'll have that meal maybe in the morning if it's something that I want for breakfast for a cheat meal. The second option is to make it so that you don't really have to cheat and make different alternatives. And the one guy I know that can make an alternative to anything is right here. I mean, this guy, some of the stuff that he's made is, I really don't crave sweets that much anymore because we both have a sweet tooth. We really do. But we have alternatives that now I love them. So for instance, one of them that I have every single night, it's fantastic, is what he calls his famous like protein brownies. So I love cookies. I love like homemade brownies. Well, he has this protein brownie that's basically made from oatmeal, almond milk, protein, and some heavy dark chocolate. And you mix that up and you put it in the microwave. We'll put the recipe up probably on our Instagram because it's so fantastic. And then we have a place called Delights here in Tampa that has some really low-calorie ice cream, and we put it right on top, and it's fulfilling, it's satiating, and it tastes delicious. Yeah. So things like that are going to really help.
It's super good. Yeah, the brownie's like unbelievable. It's like lava cake. So
it's so
you gotta go. It's like a 1/4 cup of oatmeal, like about maybe a 1/4 cup of like milk. It could be almond milk. A 1/4 cup of unsweetened dark chocolate, a scoop of like chocolate whey protein, and whatever low-calorie sweetener you like, and you just blend that up in the blender, and you put it in a bowl, like put a plate or whatever on top of the bowl and microwave it for like 1 minute and 45 seconds, and then you put some low-calorie ice cream on it. You hit your leucine threshold, right?
So
and it's a treat, right? So, but like Rye said, he pointed out is, there is studies. I know that like at University of Tampa, a lot of the guys, the students here are like, I'm going to go out tonight, I'm going to get hammered, I'm going to party, and so they'll get a hardcore training session before they go out. But research, like Ryan said, actually they did a study where they compared eating the cheat meal before versus after, and body fat was much lower when you had it before. So so you kind of take that and incorporate that how you want. But I think that's really interesting information to have. The other thing to sort of consider is that if you cause a lot of muscle damage, you can actually become temporarily insulin resistant, meaning you don't use carbs as well. So if you're like, oh, I'm going to beat the living daylights out of my legs, and you can't walk the next day because of it, that's good for growth. Don't get it twisted. But we know that like eccentric muscle damaging activity actually does cause some temporary insulin resistance. So if you actually are like that, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to slam a bunch of carbs after, in the hours to follow, your body actually might not be able to use those as well. So so that it's something that you should really keep in mind, that if you were to do something and you want to increase your insulin sensitivity, you need to make sure that workout's going to be more like a metabolic workout and not a high muscle damaging workout if you're trying to improve insulin sensitivity. That means like higher reps, supersets, and not the super heavy weights that cause as much damage if that is your primary outcome. So those are some things that you can do to incorporate it as well.
Great, I love it.
That's a great question.
Another great question here by Andrew. I've heard you talk about coconut oil and MCTs before. Can you explain what these are and why they might help, and also how much protein should I be eating with each meal?
Okay. Okay. So basically, the question. Okay. So we talked about how much protein with each meal.
The coconut oil.
The coconut. Oh, coconut oil. Yeah. No, we love coconut oil. I'll tell you what. In our lab, and so. Like Ryan's been talking a lot about ketogenic dieting, and what goes on is this: you have to understand what are ketones. So ketones essentially are produced from fat, and they provide an alternative fuel source for you. So the thing is that essentially you need to have like either a lot of fat or low carbs, or fat that quote burns or metabolizes so fast that you essentially can't keep pace with that process, and you end up forming ketones. So ketones are very satiating. They give your brain an alternative fuel source. They help you to train better, and they make you not crash. You don't think about food as much. Well, most of the fats that we consume, when we eat a longer chain fat, like the fat that's in meat, for example, basically goes through a long process where it has to get broken down. It's a lot more complex digestion process, and it has to get transported by a transporter into your cell's fat-burning furnace, which is mitochondria, to be used. So that takes a long time, and it's a regulated process. There's other fats that are shorter. They're called medium-chain fats or medium-chain triglycerides that are so small, or much smaller, excuse me, that they don't need a transporter. They just diffuse from the gut into the muscle, into the mitochondria, and are burnt a lot like carbs. So they give you really fast fuel. And it turns out that you can purchase medium-chain triglycerides. One of the things we suggest, I do recommend those, because if you take them, especially if your carbs are lower, but even if they're not, if you take medium-chain triglycerides, you do feel like happier, you feel more focused, you feel more satiated. But for you guys who are like, oh, I'm going to go out right now and buy medium-chain triglycerides, and I know bodybuilders. I know them really well. I've been studying this a lot, and what happens is like, oh, I'm going to have 3 servings. Don't. You don't want to, because your gut has to adapt. Your gut adapts to food just like your muscles adapt to training. And what's going to end up happening is you will destroy your stomach. You're going to have a real upset stomach if you do that. Start with like a half a serving for a couple days. Once your body adapts, go to a full serving. And then maybe you can get up to like 2 servings, but at a time. Be real careful. So right, what's special about coconut oil?
So yeah, coconut oil is awesome as well. Things like coconut oil, coconut butter we use, coconut manna, we use it every day. I like to mix it in my Greek yogurt. But there's some really cool stuff with coconut oil because they're high in MCTs. So basically, there's some stuff from Dr. Mary Newport over at USF, University of South Florida, with Alzheimer's, right? So basically, with Alzheimer's, one of the ways they look at people to see if they have how severe their Alzheimer's is, they have them draw a clock. Well, her husband had Alzheimer's, and basically he couldn't even draw anything that resembled a clock. Wasn't even close. And all she started doing was supplementing him 3 times a day with coconut oil. And over 30 days, all of a sudden he started to be able to draw this clock that was on point. And she's been doing that for years and years and years now, and he's starting to come back, and he's starting to be more alert. Why? Because just like Dr. Wilson talked about, it's providing this alternative source of fuel for the brain, right? Alzheimer's is starting to get looked at as like a type 3 diabetic because our brain sometimes can't really use glucose that well with Alzheimer's. So we need to provide it something else. For people that are like in the middle of the day, they're working, they're starting to feel down, coconut oil or coconut butter will provide that source. It'll be like, woo, you just woke up, and it just brings you to life. And so supplementing it and using those, maybe cooking with things like MCT oil, using coconut butter, using coconut oil can really be a good source of getting in your fats, your healthy fats, getting them in and allowing yourself to use those alternative sources of fuel.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And coconut oil is 50% MCTs, and cream is like 20. It gets up maybe like 5 to 20% MCTs. So in the morning, when you're trying to get when your carbs should be lower, then that's when you're gonna actually want to have you can have a lot of coconut oil then, and with cream and stuff like that. So great points.
Great points. Here's a question from Michaela. I have more than 50 pounds to lose. How much cardio would you suggest weekly or daily?
Okay, so Michaela, great question, and I'm really excited for you in this 12-week transformation. That's what it's all about. So as far as cardio is concerned, the main thing to kind of understand is there's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. The main thing is when you lose 50 pounds, you want your metabolism to be on point. You don't want to be the point where your metabolism has crashed and you're stuck in a corner, because most people, when that happens, they rebound back up. And that's the unfortunate truth of what happens to most people. But fortunately, people in the Bodybuilding.com transformation understand the importance of resistance training. So first thing, you want to make sure, obviously, that your resistance training is on point and you're hitting every body part at least 2 to 3 times a week. And that's important. So you're not losing muscle, or really you might be gaining muscle as you're losing body fat, and that's going to keep your metabolic rate high. So cardio, you want to think about it. There's different types of cardio. There's very long duration cardio, and the issue with very long duration cardio, yeah, it does cause you to lose fat, but it's almost like basically just causing more of a calorie deficit. And it doesn't do much for your metabolism. In fact, it might slow your metabolism, and it might make you more prone to muscle loss. So I would be conservative with the duration and keep your cardio under 20 to 30 minutes. And what you're going to want to focus on more is more higher intensity interval type training. So that's going to, and it'll depend on your starting conditioning standpoint. But what we do in our lab is we'll do intervals where we have individuals go all out for 10 to 30 seconds for anywhere from 4 to 10 total repetitions. And I would say what we've seen is people start to feel really down and overreached when they've done that more than 3 times a week. So I would say anywhere at minimum twice a week, and probably no more than 3 times a week. But you should be going really hard when you do that, and that's the key that I'll tell you right now. So go really hard, 2 to 3 times a week, interval type training. Stuff that we like is you can do it whatever you're comfortable with. Some people go outside and go on a hill. If you're not as comfortable with that, you could do it on the Stairmaster where you bump up the resistance. You could do it on a cycle, stationary bike. Whatever you're real comfortable, you could even do it in the pool. Whatever you're very comfortable with is what I would select out. But just remember that when you're doing these intervals, your perceived exertion should be very high. Okay, so you should need probably like anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes to recover between intervals. If that's not the case, you know, then you're probably not going hard enough to get the fat metabolizing benefits from that.
Great question. Another good one here from Marilyn. She says, according to Bodybuilding.com, to get my ideal weight and composition, I have to lose fat. I currently am at 173 pounds, 1,400 kcals daily. My muscle mass is increasing and body fat reducing, but my weight loss is going very slow. What do you suggest? Well, here's one of the things to keep in mind is that the scale is completely different from what you see in the mirror. And the reason I say that is because you can often weigh yourself and the weight doesn't change at all, but your body composition is changing drastically. It's what we call body recomposition. It's like simultaneously you could be gaining muscle and losing fat. If I gain 2 pounds of muscle and I lose 2 pounds of fat, my weight on the scale is not going to change. So the scale is a good way to monitor, but it's not the only way. You know your body. You know what you see in the mirror. If you're losing body fat and you're gaining muscle, that's fantastic. Even though weight loss per se on the scale isn't going down like you might want it to, your body's changing, and that's all that really matters.
I 100% agree. That's exactly. This is a question from Candace. Hey, Candace. So the question is, you know, what's your take on CLA and L-carnitine? Okay. Couple things on this. L-carnitine, you know, obviously the mechanism people are thinking behind it is that it will enhance your ability to transport fat into the mitochondria. So this is the concept, and on paper it makes sense. Like, oh, I take L-carnitine, boom, I have greater transport capacity to transport fats into my mitochondria. Remember we said it required a transporter? The problem is that it doesn't really work that way. When you take L-carnitine, you don't really increase carnitine levels in your muscle unless you take in a ton of carbohydrates. Yeah. So the studies that show that basically gave like, what was it, like it was ridiculous amounts. Something like 800 to 1,000 grams of carbs in a day. So yeah, you might increase carnitine in your muscle, but if you're eating like 800 to 1,000 grams of carbs in a day, you probably just defeated the purpose of, you know, L-carnitine. CLA.
It's good. I think with CLA, what we've seen is actually the leaner you are, the better it seems to work for people. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so CLA is kind of interesting. Basically, mechanistically speaking, it does seem to increase like the breakdown of fat. You know, as far as like some experiments have shown that. But the thing to expect with CLA is that you're not going to get drastic fat loss with it. You're not going to get drastic fat loss with CLA. Basically, what you're going to end up doing is it will help slightly, very small, minute amounts. You know what I mean? Like maybe like 0.1 to 0.2 pounds of fat in a week, for example, on a really good week. Now, the reason why in studies, statistically, that doesn't pan out all the time. But you got to think about like if you're in maintenance calories and you're just trying to gain muscle, maybe that's the difference between you gaining 0.1 and 0.2 pounds of fat in a week, which is going to add up over the 12 weeks time if you're trying to gain mass, right? So that, you know, by the end of the 12 weeks, that could be a pound less of fat you gained if you're bulking. So I think overall, you know, it can be beneficial, but not a huge fan of carnitine.
Mm-hmm. Here's a good one. What's your #1 fat loss tip for those on a cut? For me, I think it's all about low density foods is going to be a huge one, but most importantly, making your meals more satiating. And that's something that we found a lot that helps drastically. So ways you can do that. #1, one of the things that we like to do is add a salad with every meal that we have. Every meal we have, you have a little side salad with it to help fill you up. Drink a ton of water throughout the entire day. Drink a glass of water with your meal. One of the things that we like to do is when we're making like shakes, they're really satiating and they're really low calorie dense. Is like all you do is you take a protein shake, you take half of a cup, fill it up with some ice, fill it up with some almond milk, put your protein in, put it in the blender, and you just blending it in the blender is going to add in air. It's going to add in air. That's going to allow you to feel more satiated, be more full.
Exactly. And being a scientist, I really appreciate this experiment, and I appreciate the subjects who did it. They must have had to pay them a lot. But what they did was, what Ryan's talking about is that you need to select foods that are low calorie density and have a lot of volume. So they took these subjects and they took a balloon and basically put it down in their stomach. Right? It's horrible. Horrible. And what they did was, so they got used to it's sitting there, right? And they inflated the balloon, and guess what happened? They got full. So that means that bulk, even non-calorie bulk that provides air or water, basically, or fiber, creates a mechanical stimulation on the gut that says, whoa, I'm full. So if you think about it, like a fourth cup of raisins is very high calorie, a couple hundred calories or whatever, whereas a massive, huge plate, like Ryan said, a salad could be 30 calories, but your body has a volume sensor. It doesn't just sense calories. People, if you bring them in 2 days to the lab, they tend to stop eating when they hit a certain volume of food. So you have very high calorie dense foods, like dried fruit or nuts and stuff like that. When you're dieting, then you're going to want to eat more because the volume is so low. Until you sense that volume threshold, then you're actually not going to be full. And that's the main thing Ryan says. You'll naturally stop eating if you're having very high volume foods. And the other thing is, the trick is you want to eat the high volume foods first. So eat the salad first before you delve into the awesome stuff that you really like, the meat or whatever like that. And then for sure, by the time you're eating that, you're enjoying it, and you're not gonna be super hungry.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. That's awesome. Here's one. Here's something different. Can you talk about motivation a bit more? I love the week 3 video, but what's the science behind staying motivated?
Oh, okay.
There you go.
All right, so I love Bodybuilding.com and I love talking about training and stuff, but I don't get enough time to talk about the psychology of things, and that's actually, so like I said, one of my master's degrees in sports psychology, and my brother Gabe did a lot of research actually with motivation, and we did some studies with motivation. Ryan does a lot of research with motivation. Mm-hmm. The question is, what is motivation, right? It's that engine. It's what allows you to start the car, right? And but the thing to understand is that there are different types of motivation, and this is the biggest thing that I have to emphasize. So there's what we call external motivation or extrinsic motivation, and then there's internal motivation. Internal is you do the activity, which is for example, bodybuilding, because you love to do it. You know what I mean? You love to go into the weight room and feel the weights. Lifting heavy weights to you provides satisfaction. You don't do it because you're necessarily trying to impress somebody, okay? But let's just say now an external motivation is going to be more like, I'm lifting weights, not because I like it, but because I want to impress this guy or this girl. That becomes external, okay? So the key thing is, remember, what most people think is that 1 plus 1, meaning basically intrinsic motivation plus extrinsic motivation equals 2. In this case, that's actually not the case. Most of the studies show that external motivation can lower internal motivation if it's not put in perspective. So, for example, you can look at athletes they're super motivated to play their sport, and all of a sudden they get a scholarship, their motivation goes down. The key is like how the coach provides the motivation. So if the coach tells the athlete basically, hey, if you don't do this, I will take away your scholarship. Now they're no longer doing it for the love of the game, they're doing it for the scholarship. I know, like when I was in grad school, one time I had a mentor. I loved doing research, loved it. And one of my mentors basically said, hey, you're now on scholarship. You better do research, or else, because you're getting paid to do this now. And for the first time, I didn't want to go into the lab and do research, and so the main thing is acknowledge the external, but keep it internal. So if you make an accomplishment, that's phenomenal. If you go and people give you compliments, that's awesome. Acknowledge that. Say, yeah, that's phenomenal. Don't downplay the external, but don't let it drive you. Be focused on the task at hand, and your everyday tasks that you really have to get done. That's my best advice on motivation.
That's phenomenal. That's great. Here's one we got from Dan. I just started a ketogenic diet. My protein's about 35% of my calories. My carbs are below 30 grams, and the rest is fat. It's day 5, and I feel out of it. Should I carb up on the weekends to get my energy up?
Oh, okay. So, right, I'm gonna let you address the percentage. So basically, just to repeat the question, the guy's saying, so 35% of his calories essentially are from protein. So he's doing a ketogenic diet. You're doing a ketogenic diet. 35% of your calories are from protein. Your carbs are below 30. He's not feeling good. He's 5 days in. Why do you think he's
5 days in? Well, first off, 5 days is relatively quick. But one of the things that you said is that your calories, 35% of them are from protein. And basically, in order for a ketogenic diet to truly work and to truly get its maximal benefit, is protein needs to be somewhere around 20% of your total calories. And here's why. Basically, if your protein is that high, it's 35%, your body's going to recognize that. And unfortunately, the way it goes in order is that your body likes to use carbohydrates, and then immediately, if it doesn't have any, it's going to do anything it can to provide glucose for the brain. And unfortunately, that one of those processes is breaking down protein. And then it's going to go ketones once you can break down fat effectively, once you're truly ketogenic. So by you having 35% of your diet as protein, your body's saying, well, there's no reason for me to be in ketosis because I can just break down these proteins and use them as fuel. So you're kind of wavering on this in-between, like, I'm slightly high ketones and I'm not really feeling good. That's why you're feeling terrible. If you can lower that protein amount to about 20% and up your fat, I guarantee you within about a week to 2 weeks, you'll start feeling more alert. You won't have that grogginess, and you won't be floating on that in-between zone.
Yeah, and that's the how long would you say, he needs to adapt again?
So usually the adaptation takes, at minimum, for people who are training really hard, sometimes you can get in about a week. For most people, though, it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to really truly adapt to a ketogenic diet.
Yeah, so that's the key. To be honest with you, 90% of the time when we ask people, like, oh, did you try ketogenic? Oh, I tried it. I felt horrible, couldn't follow it. And I go, how long did you try it? Oh, 2 to 3 days, a week. Well, because you're adapted to carbohydrate, of course you're going to feel not good because you've taken that away. You have to do what the process that's called, you have to fat adapt. You have to fat adapt. And that takes time. And actually, one of our colleagues, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, has really found that 6 to 8 months you start feeling like even amazing. So that's kind of key to understand. Now, the second part of the question was, should I carb up on the weekends? Mm-hmm. So a lot of times, one of the things that I talk to people is like, oh, I start feeling horrible by Friday, so should I carb on the weekend? And I know a lot of you guys are doing this transformation challenge, and I'm sure that you're thinking like, hey, if I'm doing this transformation, I will lose body fat. The ketogenic diet might be the way to go. And you want to be honest with you, I think it's a great diet to do. And we found that with our research. But so we recently did the first study ever with athletes, and no one knows about this but you guys right now live here on Bodybuilding.com, so we're going to fill you in. we did the first study on basically cyclic ketogenic dieting, where we had guys, we gave them a 500-calorie deficit. These were well-trained guys. And on the weekends, one of the groups carved up. Now, one of the things Ryan pointed out is you want your ketones to be high. And you want them to be like above 0.5 millimolars. You know, in our study, we see them from 0.5 to 3 millimolars. You want it above 0.5 millimolars, okay? So what happened was, to say you're in ketosis, what happened was the guys who carved up, you remove the carbs on Monday, and their ketone, they're not in ketosis, like 0.1 millimolars. They didn't get back into ketosis till Thursday. Monday through Wednesday, they felt horrible. We found that the ketogenic dieting group lost about roughly 6 pounds of weight, and then the cyclic group lost again 6 pounds of weight. From that, you go, oh, cool, great. However, the majority of weight loss in the cyclic group was muscle. And that's a problem, because the reason why is their carbs are low, so they don't have anything to spare muscle, but their ketones are low. And ketones have a sparing effect on muscle. They're anti-catabolic. So basically, it's hard to lose muscle when ketones are very high. That's why we think ketogenic dieting is actually very beneficial for bodybuilders. So you have to be very careful whether you're cyclic ketogenic dieting. In fact, based on our study, I don't really know that I recommend it for dieting hard at all, unless you have a ton of MCTs Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to get your ketones up. That's probably not the best thing. Anything you want to add to that?
No, that's phenomenal.
Hannah has a real good. Hannah actually asked a question earlier. She goes, I already asked a question, but I wanted to say how much I love your Project Mass program. Seriously, my favorite program I've ever done. Love the splits, love the exercise, the techniques. Been very effective for me. I'm in cycle 3. Right on, Hannah. I really appreciate that feedback. We really do. You know, I heard there's a rumor there's going to be another project coming out soon, but so stay tuned for that. Thanks, Hannah. Really appreciate it.
All right, I think we got time for maybe one more here. How accurate are calipers for body fat percentage, and what's the minimum amount of protein that you should have while cutting? I think calipers for field assessments, if done properly by someone who's trained and has used them over and over again and knows how to effectively use them, can be pretty close. Of course, a lot of people don't have access to something like a DEXA, which is what we use in our lab. But calipers can be a good tool to track. Again, you know your own body, especially if people know their own bodies. You're going to know how your body's kind of changing with gaining muscle, losing fat. The scale isn't always a good way to monitor. It's a good way to monitor, but it isn't always the best way, because you might not lose weight. You might be gaining muscle, losing fat. So again, just monitor yourself, and you know your own body for sure.
Yeah, 100%. So that's key. What Ryan said is it's a really good tool measure. I know Bodybuilding.com has calipers. I recommend that everyone has those. And then the other thing that we recommend is that, of course, this is me being a scientist again, but reliability is very important. So what you want to do is to know how accurate. The main thing you're interested in is, can you see changes? Okay. So if I pinch here, and then the next time I pinch here, that's going to give me entirely different readings. So what you want to do, I'd practice with them, at least take a day to practice with them and get good at it, and take your body fat percentage at least like 3 days straight, practicing a couple times a day, and see how much variation you have. If day 1 you're 10%, and day 2 you're 15%, and day 3 you're 8%, well, it's going to be hard to tell. But if you get good enough to the point where you're 3 days straight, you're like 9, 10, 11. You know, you want to be below like 2%, variation, and then okay, I'm changing. So just like any other skill, practice. Be your own scientist, like we always say. Like our guys, when we do techniques in the lab, like when we use ultrasound, for example, to look at body fat's a skilled measure, and our guys who come into the lab, like we have Matt Sharp and Kevin Shields. Matt Sharp and Kevin Shields are our main ultrasound technicians. They practice incessantly, And for you to be your own scientist, you want to be real good and consistent with that. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, guys. We really appreciate it. And if you guys have any other questions at all, head over to the Muscle Prof. The Instagram's it's going to be live later.
Yeah, 5 to 6 Mountain Standard Time. Basically, 5 to 6 Mountain Standard Time, we'll be on at the Muscle Prof, and we'll be answering questions live on there. So hit us up there. We also have, if you go to the 200K transformation page, we have a forum, and I'll go in there today. I'm going to be answering some questions. We'll have some live questions and answers there as well later in the week. But just go to the forum and go ahead and answer your question, and I'll do my best to go in there and answer that question. And like I said, if you're on Instagram at the Muscle Prof, come check us out later. And thanks, guys. It was awesome hanging out with you. Looking forward to doing it again soon.